I want to talk Swift ID. I thought this was a fun example of how I undertake bird study, and it sort of fits in with the last video I posted about finding rare birds. I'm not trying to shill that video or anything, but I thought, sometimes I see something unusual, and then trying to figure out why I think it's unusual has been such a big part of my learning process as a birder, and definitely helps find rare birds. I thought I would pull this together into a little mini case study. It's late April this year, 2025. I'm sitting on the shoreline of Lake Erie on this bluff edge. There's some frontal boundaries moving through. The wind's really stiff out of the southwest and west, and birds are zooming along the edge into the wind, nice and low. The sun is supposed to break later on, so I thought I'm just going to sit here, take pictures of like swallows and swifts flying by if they're low and close and in good light, and yeah, I'll just see what happens. So I get some pics. This is a cliff swallow I got while I was sitting there. Chimney swifts were one of the more common bird species that were moving at the time. Actually started a little clicker. I clicked about 115 that flew by me in a short period of time in the evening. And that's where this kicks off. I spotted this swift coming at me, low, straight towards me, and I just immediately thought that flight style looks different. It looks like it's flapping different than the dozens and dozens of other swifts I've flown by, so that's always the trigger. Pay attention. I decided to just sort of start blasting photos as it came in too, because I was doing photography and I had my camera sitting there right beside me. And it arced by 30, 35 feet away in good light. This is one of the pictures I got of the bird, sort of showing it most clearly. It just kind of happened to be topside. And I just thought, well, it looked like it flew a little bit differently, and it looks a little different. Like there's just something about it. It looks kind of rounded. The one thing that popped into my head is I feel like I remember somebody saying that the distance of the secondaries relative to the distance of the primaries down the wing, like the ratio, can help differentiate the species. So I looked at it and it was closer to what I remembered for Vaux swift. So again, it just kind of hits that point where I'm like, all right, like I've got my next study opportunity. I definitely thought like, ooh, should I tell someone? It's definitely headed towards Point Pelee where there's lots of birders, but I thought, you know what, like not totally sure. I grabbed my phone, I started looking at Sibley's website. They talk about like a bulge in the wings, and it's like, well, there's like not really a bulge, like maybe a tiny bit in the primaries. Then one thing Sibley says is he says there's a white band that goes over the eye and right over the top of the bill and connects to the other side. For Vaux swift, Chimney swift, it doesn't connect. I thought, I've got pictures of it coming at me from head on, so I should be able to figure this out. So I pull some photos. This is another one. You can see the white coming over the eye. It very clearly does not connect over the top of the bill. I thought, even though this looked slightly different, that's like a big red flag. I walk back from the ledge and I sort of shelve this till I get home because I'm still curious to look into the identification more. Yeah. This is how I usually go about it. I just go home, I pull up the eBird media page, I set months around the time when I'm watching. I was out late April. I pick a geography, to make sure that it's at least similar populations from where the bird might be coming from. I pull up Vox's first, and I hit that like high quality best photos or whatever just to make sure you can see the details you're looking for. Some of the Vaux swift photos I pull up, they don't really have the white going right over the bill. Actually, quite a number of them are quite similar to the photograph of the bird I got, and I kind of thought, damn you, David Sibley. Which, it's obviously a bit of a joke, but I'm back in business. I still need to research this bird, see if I can figure it out. I threw up like a post just being like, hey, I saw this, it was interesting. I don't know, if you have any thoughts, let me know. I'm going to look into it. I'll go back to Sibley's stuff. Blog, this is the one that comes up first when you search it, from 2010. He's got these wonderful illustrations showing the wing difference. There's like the bulge in the primaries compared to less bulge. But even within the drawings, you kind of start to hit that meme where it's like corporate wants you to see the difference between these two photos, and you start to say to yourself, like, it's just one of those field marks you hear about all the time. And I just find personally, when I'm in the field or looking at photos, I just never really feel comfortable with it. Interestingly, if you go to the next sort of Google search return, there's actually a more detailed page on Sibley's blog about how to separate the two species, and has, the stuff discussed earlier, but also a bunch of bullet points. The calls are different, which my bird didn't call. Talked about the wing shape. Wings relatively broad versus narrower. It says it's an overall impression, so that can be hard to judge from photos or from brief encounters, or without birds to compare it to. Slightly smaller versus slightly larger can be really hard to tell. The pale brand across the forehead, which we talked about. The bill is smaller, which if you do happen to just blast photos like I did in this instance, could be of value. But it's a whole lot of features that are just like, oh boy, it's like I don't. As someone without a lot of experience in studying this identification challenge or really paying close attention to them in the field, it's a lot of points that don't really build confidence. And even Sibley has these unreliable or untested features with the paler underparts and rump. I've definitely heard of a paler rump, but when I've looked at photos or when I've seen birds in the field, I find they all seem to have different shades of rump within chimney swift. Quicker wing beats, more twinkling flight. It's like the flight style in the bird I saw seemed different than all the others, so that's why I'm here, but it doesn't really help. Different glides. These ones are interesting too. It says possibly shorter upper tail coverts. That's another one that surely is a photograph only situation. But it sounds a little more potentially concrete than some of the general impression notes, especially when you're dealing with a possible vagrant. And he notes that 2 subspecies have been recorded in North America. And I was like, what? Actually chased a hurricane a couple of years ago into the Salton Sea in California and had a couple of Vaux swifts that were flagged as rare at the time. And I thought, oh man, like instant deviation. I pulled up the range map. Clearly the Mexican population that has been recorded in North America is resident well south of where my hurricane went. So it's infinitely more likely that these are North American Vaux swifts that were just a bit early on migration. But these are like the fun little learning moments you have along the way. So sort of the next step is to hit the Facebook groups or other sort of informal places on the internet where people have posted. I like the Advanced Bird ID group, and I just search and start scrolling through the posts. One of the interesting comments was around how somebody actually measured photographs and used relative ratios to identify a state first chimney swift, which is another one where you definitely need photos, but it could be a little more definitive. I've always had a really hard time feeling confident in measuring distances and ratios from photographs, but I won't get into that right now. Another interesting comment that I pulled from the group was just how there are 4 subspecies of Vaux swift, and some of them are ridiculous. They don't look like they're the same size or shape or anything than the other ones. These are the ones from the Yucatan Peninsula, these little guys here, which I think is of interest in the future. I'm sure there's places along the US Gulf Coast that might be looking for this species from time to time. That would be an easier way to pick one out from a chimney swift if it was a totally different size and shape in a significant way, not a subtle way. One of the posts brought me to the Colorado Bird Records Committee page, which shout out to them for having an actually functioning website. They've got 2 accepted records from the state with photos. I think it's interesting to pull open the photos and you can see it's an awfully big bulge in the primaries. And you read through some of the comments on the reports and they highlight like how little we know, but also people kind of still being confident in the ID, where someone pulls up these photos and says, yeah, that's clearly a Vaux swift. I think it looks short and rounded and funny relative to the chimney swifts that I see in Ontario, which my bird was in the field, but it's like there is something to it. Like when I see some of these photos, like this photo, I think it definitely doesn't look like what my experience is with chimney swift locally, but I can't say why. So sort of time to shift gears. Other critical component to undertaking a research thing like this, in my opinion, is you can't just look at pictures of Vaux swift and try to make them fit the bird you saw out of range. Do the same thing with chimney swift, same geography, same time of year, start to pull up photos. Again, it's like you can kind of see a difference when you look at the photos, but there's no real way to say what it is. But I think one of the most interesting findings is that in a matter of minutes, I do find pictures of chimney swift, such as this one taken in Michigan, around the same time of year, that look like the bird I photographed. It's weird, it's rounded, it doesn't quite look like it's got the same shape as some of the other ones, but obviously these aren't all Vaux swifts, whether it's age related or gender related within the species. That's the kind of information I definitely don't find readily, but maybe we're detecting, I'm detecting that difference. Maybe the bird I had fly by is just a different age than all the other ones. Maybe all the other ones were adult males, and somehow a young female had arrived early, and that's why I thought I could detect a difference in how the bird flew and how it looked. But maybe it's nothing. But I still want to know why. That's kind of like my final goal. So this is a picture I got of the subject bird from the shore of Lake Erie that day. It's probably the best picture I got of the underside because I got a lot of pictures of it coming straight at me, and then the top side as it curved by. But even with this, without really seeing the head, without seeing much of the bird, it's just like something about it that makes me say, no, that is definitely a chimney swift. I know it looked unusual in the field. I thought it flapped a little differently, but it's definitely a chimney swift. It doesn't look like the Vaux's swifts. And I think it hit me like a ton of bricks. Sibley, in that initial website, notes that Vaux's, this reference photo on the left, has a paler belly. Chimney Swift has a darker belly, but that you can line up specimens or look at different birds that seem to have all different shades of belly. But what I think it could be is that Chimney Swift tends to have the belly, especially the lower belly, be the same darkness and the same contrast as the undertail coverts, whereas that paler belly of Vaux's Swift tends to lead to like undertail covert feathers, like genuinely being darker. In some photos, it just looks like they have like a dark brown set of undertail coverts with like a grayish brown belly. The contrast line is like here towards the back of the bird, whereas Chimney Swift, it's like mid-bird up to like this reference photo, which is just like the throat and very upper breast is pale. So when you see my little reference photo, you can kind of see that it's obviously a very similar dark tone from at least mid-bird down to the undertail coverts. I don't know how diagnostic it is, but a bunch of reference photos I looked at did seem to show that difference. So even if you can't tell how pale the belly is, maybe the relative contrast of the undertail coverts could be something. I know it's what I'm going to look for in the field in the future. If I ever see an unusual bird, it's just going to give me that like new weapon in my arsenal. If I ever do want to pick out an unusual vagrant like that, I'm going to check the undertail coverts. So yeah, just like a new weapon in the arsenal. I'm going to use it. I thought I'd share it. Maybe there are more Vaux's swifts that occur from time to time, but we just don't know how to recognize them. So if there is a way to sort of at least filter out birds that might be worth extra scrutiny or worth trying to get extra photos of, maybe it'll help us further unravel the puzzle of the identification locally and see if they do occur or don't occur. Yeah, I definitely thought it was a good tie-in to the last video where I just talked about how not excluding possibilities and then trying to figure out why a bird is one thing or the other. It doesn't necessarily lead to everything that you think seems unusual into being something rare. I have the utmost confidence my bird is a chimney swift, but like my personal knowledge of how to separate those two skyrocketed just because it caught my interest and it like sort of gave me that chance to delve into it. Once I felt pretty confident, I don't really feel like writing a paper or summarizing every possible ID feature. It's like, for me, the journey ends at this point because I'm busy. There's other birds to see. I've got work to do. Things to do with my family. But yeah, I also like thankfully avoided posting like anything too crazy at the time. I was able to temper my initial excitement with maybe I have something unusual. But no, this definitely needs to be something that I learn more from, and we'll figure out after the fact. But yeah, just a cool case study I wanted to share. Maybe it'll lead to more cool sightings in the future. Hope you found it interesting, educational, fun. Breeding season is underway where I live right now. First fall migrants are just starting to show up though, so we'll see you out there.